fell again. I fell a third time. Can't get away from the sin. I keep falling. Then I come back to you, crawling, asking forgive me now I'm ballin', knowing that I let you down, appalling. I don't wanna jeopardize my calling. When I hear your voice no more I'm halting. I just wanna live in the world you're revolving. I am so imperfect I'm getting involved in these flesh-tied friends, the blind consulting, pulling me away from the world and revolting. Asking for forgiveness is probably insulting, but you keep taking me back and you're vaulting. Give me chances. You keep giving me chances. You give me chances. You just keep giving me chances. King. Royalty, stand up, brand up, fam up, hand out, no way, hands up, know what, name that, it's mine, claim that, it's time, message, we shine, above all, the decline, the darkness cannot last, the shadow of my past, before I gain knowledge of heritage, I have the bloodline that I share, most powerful out here, the mover of mountains is who I am touting, the richest among us is who I'm the son of, from sundown to sun up, that's how I the come up, position is just mine, the favor in due time, can't have it, man you lying, the powerless you trying, enemy beneath me, there's nothing to teach me, the people receive me, cause my God complete me, and my God does keep me, and my God they free me, and my God redeem me, and my God relieve me, kings is the million crown me, I am winning my position, God's giving, God's in it, God's chosen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Elevation Podcast. My name is Shawn Riff-Raff, and I am here with a special guest here, and his name is Danny Brassel. He's a highly sought-after speaker, trainer, known as the Jim Carrey with a PhD, and I'm definitely going to ask you about that. He spoke over 3,000 audiences and authored 16 books, including his latest, Leadership Begins with Motivation. What's up, Danny? How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Shawn. Thanks for all that you do.
Yeah, listen, leadership begins with motivation, and I think in the era in which we live in right now, we definitely need a bit of motivation, all of us, really. For those who've never heard of you, tell us a little bit about you, what it is that you do, and where you're from, and just give us a little bit of your background so we can get to know you a little better.
Well, it's funny because you and I were talking beforehand, Shawn. I did my undergraduate degree in Washington, D.C., and I know you're in D.C. Loved being there. I thought I was going to be president of the United States one day, and then I worked for a congressman on Capitol Hill. It was the worst job of my life. I hated it. I actually, in high school, I used to clean toilets at a health club, and if anybody ever gave me the choice which to do again, I'd much rather clean toilets at a health club. But I was really blessed. I got to work at CCNB in DC. It's the world's, I don't know if it's the world's, but it's America's largest homeless shelter. Worked there with Carol Penley and Cliff Newman. Then I worked for the American Society of Newspaper Editors. So I was a journalist, and I had the greatest job because I got to meet every single newspaper editor, and I had all these great job offers to work at different newspapers across the country. And the Chicago Tribune offered me this great job working in the city beat for $16,000 a year. And then a friend of mine told me that there was a teaching position available in Compton, California, in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I always tell people I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. So basically, that's where my career has led me for the last 25 years. I've been a teacher, a tutor, a professor, a researcher, an author. And now my passion is really spreading the joy of education to educators, to parents, to executives. And I really try to help people read more, read better, and love reading. I think schools do a decent job of teaching kids how to read. But the question I always ask people is, what good is it teaching a kid how to read if they never want to read? So I teach
Right.
why to read. Yeah. So I mean, I've
Wow.
never had to tell a kid go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid go play a video game, and I never want to have to tell a kid go read a book. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they love doing it.
Wow. With teaching in South Central well, you said in Compton was this is South Central.
Mhm.
What's the experiences of having having that's your first teaching job there?
Yeah.
Um, how would your experiences in teaching in an inner city school like that?
Well, it was wonderful, Shawn. Actually, first of all, so I was the only man at my school. I was the only white person at my school. I taught with predominantly elderly African American women from the South who all had been teaching for at least 20 years.
Wow.
And my mentor was Mrs. Turner. Mrs. Turner was from Alabama. Mrs. Turner believed she'd been teaching for 40 years, and she
Right.
believed in two
Wow.
things: discipline and the Bible. I mean,
Right.
when her little ones got out of line, she started reading aloud Revelations to them. And it was this beautiful woman, this guardian angel of mine, who took me under her wing, and she taught me how to make it in a very negative environment. I love the kids. I like most of the parents, but the bureaucracy and the
Mm,
challenges and the walls that they were putting up in front of the kids really angered me.
mm,
And it was kind of it was an epiphany, Shawn, because I realized I've been blessed in my life. I mean, my
mhm,
family, we were lower middle class, but I realized I had a whole bunch of advantages my students didn't have. I mean, both my
mm,
parents were in the home; they were married their entire life. You know, my mom reads every single day. My dad is a librarian. I actually hated reading growing up. I mean, the only thing I could do, but I always had access to reading materials. I always had people helping me. I had great teachers that believed in me, and I heard so many negative things being said to the kids, and it really kind of angered me. And
right.
I mean, I've kind of really made it my mission. I always ask for, give me the kids. I wanted to be Ellis Island. Give me your huddled masses that nobody else wants. And
Right.
I used to look at the kids. I'm like, because I'm very anti standardized testing. I think it's a waste of time. I think it, if you and I are both readers, and I love reading biographies of famous people, and I always say
Right.
this, what's the one common element most famous people have? Most of them dropped out of school, which
Right.
is disgusting to me. It tells me, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we
Right.
seeing that light inside of it? I mean, everybody has something. It might not be
Right.
academic. I mean, I don't know how Michael Jordan's grades were, but the guy's an artist on a basketball court. He could do.
Right.
I recently watched The Last Dance, and
Mhm.
I forgot how much I loved watching Michael Jordan, and I forgot that I actually liked his layups better than his slam dunks. I'm like, he could stay in the air for like 5 seconds, and he brought
Right.
so much joy. I actually write about it in one of my books when he was going to retire the first time. The owner of the Chicago Bulls, Jerry Reinsdorf, he told the head coach Phil Jackson, "Well, you got to talk Michael out of retiring." And
Right.
so poor Phil has to go talk to Michael, and he's like, "Well, I'm supposed to talk you out of this, Michael. I can't talk you out of anything. But if you do retire, I want you to think about this. You have a gift. You have a gift like Beethoven playing the piano or Michelangelo painting. And
Mhm.
if you don't continue playing basketball, you're going to deny your gift to millions of people the joy of what
Mhm.
you do." And Michael's
Mhm.
still retired, but he always had that in the back of his head, and that's why he came back 18 months later. Was this is really what I'm here to do? And I think that's our job. Is no matter what you do in life, you're always a parent, a teacher, and a role model because everybody's
Mhm.
watching us all the
Yeah.
time. And I say that
Yeah.
to my kids too. I say, you know what? That's your character. Your character is what you do when people aren't watching because you have no idea people are always watching.
Yeah.
Uh,
Definitely.
you know,
Definitely.
so I mean that's a very long answer to your short question, but
It's
I
all good.
actually I loved teaching in the inner city. Even though I was making a lot of money as a public school teacher, I used to tutor after school. Of it,
Right.
I tutored in a very affluent community, And it was amazing to me the contrast,
Yeah.
just how people see the world. And
Yes.
it kind of set it out. It almost got me to the point where I started becoming racist towards white people because I'm like, man, you have no idea how many advantages you have. And I mean, I'm joking. I mean, people have
Right.
there's issues everywhere. So I'll give you a
Yeah.
funny example. I was doing a training at a elementary school in Beverly Hills, California. So I asked the principal, I say, "Do you have a parent involvement problem?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, we don't have enough parking spaces." And I just started laughing. I'm like, "Wow, you totally interpreted that question differently than I meant it," you know. But when I started asking her more questions. It was interesting because the kids in Beverly Hills, all their parents had been divorced like 6 times, and so they had like six
Right.
sets coming to everything. Whereas my kids in Compton, you know, a lot of people think, oh, the parents don't care. I'm like, well, just because the parent ain't there doesn't mean they don't care. I mean, some of these parents are
Right.
working 3 jobs, and most of them are single parents. I mean, there's a special place in heaven reserved for single moms, I think.
Right.
Uh, and so it really became my passion. And actually now my reading engagement program, my online reading engagement program, I've gotten to the point where we're focused on right now is the developing world. And so we're really focused right now. We're in negotiations with the African kingdoms have all kind of come together. There's going to be some really interesting things happening in Africa in the
Oh,
next
interesting.
10 years. And so our program, it looks like we're starting in South Africa with about 300,000 kids, but then we're going to reach out to Nigeria and to Rwanda, Uganda, Egypt. And then we're already in India and Southeast Asia and Pakistan.
That's
There's
great.
just exciting things. And that's where I
Definitely.
think that just like this interview right now is the world just got a whole lot smaller. You can be
Yeah.
anywhere on the
Yeah.
planet and communicate now.
Right. Uh, so you started speaking. When did you start your? When did you you've spoken to over 3,000 audiences. So when did you start that journey and the speaking and motivating and things like that?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Shawn. Nobody's ever asked me that.
We
Two
we want to
thousand
know.
2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar one weekend, and it turned out to be a scam. And we bought a whole bunch of real estate and lost everything. And I could focus on the negatives, but I'm always a positive person. So I look at all the positives that came out of it. I mean, first of all, my wife is my life mate because I put her through hell. She stuck by me. Secondly, I don't really, I used to put a lot of faith in money, and now I'm like, you know what, easy come, easy go. I mean, money doesn't mean anything.
Absolutely.
Um, you know, third,
Absolutely.
I became a Christian. I'm embarrassed to say that, but the more I read the Bible, the more I realize I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. Um, Fourth, 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 I try not to judge people anymore because
Right.
if I was somebody that looked at what we had done, I would have said, well, you're an idiot. You deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. But
Yep.
the most amazing thing that came out of it was we were going to be in a position where we were going to have to file bankruptcy, and I really didn't want to file bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Eventually, I had to, and I still it kills me that we did that 5 years later. But I didn't want to file bankruptcy, and so my accountant said, "Well, in order not to file bankruptcy, you have to make this much more money this year." And so I started speaking on the side. I was a professor at the university, and so I started speaking on the side, and I hit the number he gave me. Well, then the next year, Shawn, he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. And so the third year, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And so during one of the worst economic catastrophes in American history, I actually built a speaking business, which has taken me to 5 continents and 3,000 audiences. But I learn every time I'm in front of a different audience too. I always tell people when I was first starting out, I did a presentation for my public library, and they said, "Oh, we're going to get about 500 people to this presentation." Well, four people showed up, Shawn. You
That's
know,
how it is, isn't
it's totally
it?
weird. Well, two of them were my realtors, and two of them was this Hispanic couple, and that didn't speak any English. But I'm a big believer. I'm going to give you 110%. And so I did my song and dance. We all laughed. I did as much in Spanish as I could. Well, here's the teaching point, Shawn. The Hispanic woman, she was taking English classes at the Adult Literacy Center, and she recommended me as a speaker. And they hired me to do a 1-hour talk for 6 times my normal rate of pay that I was making. And I realized you never know who am I to say? I can look at you, Shawn, and I'm like, oh, well, there's Shawn. He's wearing a T-shirt. How important he could be. I've learned that the people wearing the T-shirts are usually the billionaires. It's people in suits.
Man, that's told. I've told this story before here that I've had very similar experiences. Christian hip hop. That's what I did for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years. I don't know, but. When the most interesting event, I was always, invited to perform at youth groups and a youth night at churches and that type of thing, generally a youth audience. And one, I was invited to perform at a prayer conference, which, okay, sure, no problem. I'm going to this prayer conference. And I went to a hotel. It was a hotel. It was the Washington Court Hotel in DC. And given at the Washington Court Hotel, it was no one there. This was the most intimidating thing ever. No one there was 65-plus-year-old white people.
Oh my God!
And it wasn't a show with chairs. It was tables. It was a conference. It was tables, and it was like, here you go on and rap, and give me the microphone. And I'm like,
how did that go?
But interestingly enough, what I saw was 65-year-old plus white people. Mm-hmm. Who was actually there were representatives of churches, pastors, youth ministries from around the country. I saw what I saw, but was actually sitting there. And so at the end of the the event, I did 1 or 2 songs, I can't remember. But at the end of the event, I sat at my product table just expecting to sit there for 45 minutes and then leave. But a pastor from Alaska purchased 250 CDs.
Oh, wow.
and so that was one experience, and I had a very similar experience where somebody just gave me a blank check and said, fill it out the way you need to. Wow. So you never know, like you can't, you never know. You don't, whether it's one person there or 1,000 people here, it really doesn't matter. You do what it is that you do, and then don't apologize for it.
You had that experience, Shawn, where you have because one of the things I've learned is don't judge the faces, because sometimes the person that looks like the sourpuss is getting more out of it than anybody else. Have you had that experience?
Absolutely. Yeah. That you can't, there's a certain extent where you can read people's faces, and then there's a certain extent where you take it with a grain of salt. You know what I'm saying? Because you never know what a person is getting, and you don't change what you're doing because you read something on somebody's face. Yeah, I've learned that. I've learned
Have you ever
lesson.
tried to attempt to get the white people to be in rhythm?
Not any more than I have anyone else.
That's what I'll give you a funny story. I was at a football game at Dominguez High in Compton once, and I'm on the Dominguez side, and I'm watching the cheerleaders that we were playing a very white team, and so we were killing them. I'm watching the sideline for the white team, and the cheerleaders are like, "Go Billy, go Tommy, go Billy," and I'm watching my sideline, and our cheerleaders like, "My name is Loretta, and I get down with my," and I'm like, "Holy cow!" And I'm like, "I am so white." It made me laugh.
Man, how did you? Speaking of you, how did you get the to be known as the Jim Carrey with a PhD? That's an interesting name.
I don't take anything very seriously. I mean, life is short, man, Shawn. I mean, I used to look at my little ones. I'm like, research shows the average adult laughs 15 times a day. The average kindergartner laughs 300 times a day. So your job is to make me laugh 315 times a day. Like, ooh, doing all this silly stuff. And I just wanted to have fun. Actually, I'll give you a serious story about it. Was when I first started teaching, it was tough. There were things I was seeing that were really tough. Kids that came from some pretty rotten, and I mean, I tell people my first 3 years teaching, I never met a dad. I mean, there was a lot of, and there was, I mean, I had to report social services quite a bit for bruises and things like that. I always tell people my best day when I first started teaching, I've taught all age levels, but my passion turned out to be with the little ones, because I love their energy. And my best day when I first started teaching was at Christmas time. I decided, okay, I'm going to get all the kids a gift. And so I wanted to make it an educational gift. So I bought them all boxes of dominoes. And so I gift wrapped every box, and I put a candy cane on every box. Because I'm like, okay, dominoes, there's a math objective. They'll be able to learn math. So the day comes, I give them to the kids, and the kids open them up. And so what do? They're throwing them at each other. They're eating them, doing everything I didn't mean for them to do. And then one of my little boys, so most of my students were African-American and Latino. And I had a little boy, Gonzalo, and Gonzalo refused to open up his gift. And I'm like, Gonzalo, why aren't you opening up your gift? And he said, I want something under the tree this year. That was my best day. I mean, I was going home crying like every night. And it was Mrs. Turner, my mentor. And she said, you ain't going to make it. You keep on doing this. She's like, you got to start learning to laugh about it. And she got me laughing. And so then I started keeping a journal with the kids. Every time they said something, I had this little girl, I'm unique, man. I'm unique. This girl was like 2 feet tall, and she could beat up a fifth grader. She had a mouth on her, and I just adored her. But she used to pass the nines with kids on the playground doing your mama to the kids. And she said once, this is a 6-year-old kid, and she looks at this. She got this fifth grader to cry. She's like, "Your mama's so poor. I saw her walking down the street with a shoe. I said, hey, you lost a shoe." She said, no, I found a shoe. This is a 6-year-old kid. I mean, I got her. She was in a fight one day, and I gave her a lecture, and she looks up at me and she's like, Mr. Sale, I love you. Give me a hug. How do I not love this little girl? She was just the brightest. I tried to adopt her because she came from just the worst environment in the world. But that's where the humor comes in. Is I just see way too much negativity in the world. That's why, like right now, I tell people. I've been saying this for years. I'm like, you really want to help yourself, turn off the TV news and read a funny children's book. I can already tell you what's on the news tonight. The world is coming to an end, and whoever the president is doing a bad job. It's been the last 100 years. It's been the same negative news. Read something that lifts you up. And so that's why even in the books that I write, I try to write short stories that are about real people that lift people up.
Right. So that was actually that was my very next question. You've written 16 books. What is the general theme? What's the general theme that you go after, or are they all different?
Yeah, so they're all different, but when I first started writing books, they were academic books. So they're the kind of book that if you ever need to go to sleep, if you don't want to take it, I got books for you. You'll be out within a half a page. And then once I started, because I had started off my trainings had started off with parents and with teachers, and then I went to administrators and with the kids. But then now I've been doing a lot more. For my speaking, I do a lot more now with executives and leadership. So the last couple of books have been filled with really like inspirational anecdotes. Actually, before I forget, I wanted to make sure to serve your audience. I want to give everybody a complimentary copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. I'll give you the website is readleadandsucceed.com, and I'll give everybody a copy of the book plus a couple of trainings I do for parents. And that was a book, I wrote it for a principal of a school who didn't know how to engage his faculty. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, I give you an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation of a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy because you're an adult. So I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that demonstrates the same concept. And I'm just trying to lift people up. And the leadership begins with motivation. I really wrote for the pandemic to really lift people up. There's a story in there. So I grew up listening to Paul Harvey on the radio. I don't know if you remember, Shawn. You're probably not as old as I am. You chop off my head, you count the rings at this point. But when I was at 12:15 every day, Paul Harvey would come on the radio. He's like, "I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story." And then he tell you this story, and you're trying to figure it out the whole time. And I love those stories, and so I try to write that way. But there's a couple of stories in the book I love. One of them is about this guy named Tony Campola. And Tony, he was trying to sleep one night. He couldn't get to sleep. And so he decided to find a diner to get a coffee and a donut. So it's like 2:30 in the morning. He's having his coffee and his donut. And all of a sudden, a couple of prostitutes walk into the diner. And they're very loud and obnoxious. And, Tony's kind of disturbed listening to them. And then all of a sudden, the one prostitute, she says, well, tomorrow's my birthday. And the other one's like, well, do you expect me to have a birthday party for you? And she's like, no, I've never had a birthday party in my life. And they laugh and they leave. And Tony's sitting there at his table. He's like, that's a really sad statement I just heard. She's never had a birthday party? And so he asked the waiter, he's like, do those two come in every single night? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, would you mind if tomorrow night I come in like about 1 a.m. and we decorate the diner and have a birthday party for her? What's her name? And he gives her name. And I mean, I always get choked up telling this story, but so the next night, the two prostitutes come at 2:30, and there's the word had gotten out. A whole bunch of her friends came to the diner, and everybody's like, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" And this woman, she's just in tears, has a birthday party, and Tony was a minister, and so he prayed for everybody afterwards. And I thought that guy did something that too few of us do. Lots of people like to preach, but most people don't serve. And it's just beautiful. I've never liked the term servant leadership because I'm like, no. That's like saying pretty. It's redundant. A true leader is a servant by definition. I mean, the greatest leader of all time, he serves. That's all. That was his entire mission, was to serve. And so that's the kind of story so that's the uplifting one. So then there's one I was just telling because I have 3 kids and I'm always trying to get my kids to get excited about stories. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm like, there was this guy named Gary Gilmore in 1977, and he was going to be the first person executed by the federal death penalty in like 20 years. And so they strapped him to his chair. It was in Utah. He had like killed some clerk or whatever, and he was in front of the firing squad. And they asked him if he had any last words, and he said his last words, and then he was killed. Well, fast forward 10 years later, there's this executive for this advertising company, and he's making a pitch for this fashion company. And the fashion company was doing very poorly. They were in 3rd place. Their competitors were killing them. And they needed something to really start selling their products. And so he remembered those 3 words from Gary Gilmore, and he said, well, why don't we say this? And everybody in the room was like, that's horrible. No way. And this guy's like, you know what? And he looks at the CEO. He's like, trust me on this, Phil. Trust me. Use this as your campaign. And so Phil used it, and it transformed his company. So Phil was Phil Knight, and his struggling fashion company was a shoe company named Nike, who went from being 3rd to Converse and Reebok and Adidas to #1. And the 3 words that were the advertising campaign were "Just do it." And I love that story because, coming from academia loves committees. I'm like, wow, if you really want to accomplish nothing, that's when I was on Capitol Hill. That's what they do. They form committees. oh, we really need, wow, we need to do something right now. Let's form a committee and discuss it. uh,
It's democracy is an interesting thing.
it is. It's an interesting. Well, now
Sometimes we should actually have the people who know the most about a subject discuss it, and not the people who don't know anything about it discuss it with the people that have studied it for 20 years. But for some reason, we work by consensus, and so it was just democracy is such a funny thing. It's interesting that you mentioned Paul Harvey because that kind of tells me that you possibly grew up listening to talk radio.
Yeah.
Because I voluntarily listened to talk radio. Actually, it was my dad's fault. So I heard Paul Harvey all the time because I never gave up listening to talk. I don't know why I never gave up listening to. It's probably why I have a podcast now. Is that
that's great
because talk radio is a thing. Okay, so when you speak, and I guess is more, I guess for the more recent things that you do, and motivation, what does it mean when you say you're motivating people? Like, I know one of the things that we talk about is leadership through motivation. How does that, when you're speaking, what is I guess the formula or the principle you use? What, like, when you're motivating people, what are you motivating them with?
Well, I think one thing that's important, Shawn, for everybody to consider is everybody's unique. And that was the blessing as a teacher is I could have 33 students, but there was 33 different types of gasoline to fuel these different kids. If you watch the best coaches in sports, I mean, I'm a big sports fan, the best coaches know how to get the best out of different players, but they treat them differently. I always tell people, one of the silliest things we strive for in America is equality. I mean, people don't need to be treated equally. They need to be treated fairly. Some people don't need a lot of help. Some people need a lot of extra help. You have to give everybody, but even that person that needs a lot of extra help, that might be the person that's the one. You have no idea. Everybody has something different. And so that's really one of the things, Zig Ziglar, one of my idols, he used to say, motivation, it's like bathing. It's temporary. That's why we recommend you do it regularly. And I'm trying to really stress to people, so I have the world's leading reading engagement program. So in just over 2 months, we can get any kid to boost their reading by about 2 to 3 grade levels, and that's all great. I mean, people are all excited about the score. What's more excited about to me, what's really important and dear to my heart, is that kids start choosing to read because they want to read. And really something I try to stress to people. I'm like, the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. The people who read more read better. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. I was working with a mom and she was worried because her son was only reading Captain Underpants. And I said, the little boy who reads nothing but Captain Underpants is going to be a better reader than the little boy who's not reading anything. I mean, Captain Underpants is basically the gateway drug to Shakespeare. You got to get them hooked, though. Example, I was teaching at Markham Middle School in Watts in South Central. And so I taught 8th grade special ed, which it wasn't special education. It was 16 boys nobody else wanted to teach. 8 African-American, 8 Latino, and if their life wasn't miserable enough, they got the white dude as a teacher. And these guys, I was supposed to teach them Macbeth, Shakespeare. Please. I mean,
that was such an interesting analogy that you just said. You just said 8 black, 8
But again, so that's the expectation is I have to teach them Shakespeare. And so what I did is before we read Shakespeare, we read Walter Mosley's Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned. Because Walter is actually from South Central. He speaks like somebody from South Central. So you hear it. The guy's like, man, I know what he's talking about. He sounds like me. And I'm like, what Walter's talking about? It's just these gangs, and it's the same thing with Shakespeare. It's just these guys have their own type of lingo when they're talking in their gangs. It sounds funny, but every gang sounds funny. And all of a sudden now it's clicking in the guys' heads. Oh, you got to relate it to them. I mean, I never. This country's crazy. We teach kids calculus, but we don't teach them how to balance a checkbook.
Right.
I think that's an important skill. And I'm not saying calculus is important, but I'm like, let's look at that. And so
It's the
when
fundamentals of how to live.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but when I'm one of the big things the points I'm really trying to make with executives, which was what I would do with my students as well, is so the beginning of the year, it's January, everybody wants to make their New Year's resolution. I always tell this to kids and to adults: resolutions are temporary, routines are permanent. And so what
Yes.
my goal is to establish better habits. And
Habits. Yes.
it's little things. If I can get you to do this little thing, and I got the idea from reading They Call Me Coach by John Wooden, the UCLA basketball coach, because through his 28 years, I think it was like 28 years at UCLA, the first practice, the very first thing he always taught his players to do was how to put on their socks and tie their shoes. And everybody thought it was a silly lesson at the time, but now that these guys are older, all of them realize, no. He was teaching us that the little details matter, that if we do this right, we won't get blisters. And if we don't get blisters, we won't get injured. We'll be able to play better. And it's the little things. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my reading program with kids all the time, is I'm trying to show parents, I'm like, if we can just get the kids so that you have a habit every night before you go to bed, you read something. And when I'm talking to kids, I'm always like, okay, and remember, you are what you read, so read good stuff. If I love how people are angry. They drive to work, they listen to talk radio, and then they read the newspaper about the end of the world, and then they start yelling at their employees, and they wonder why they're in such a bad mood. I'm like, you just had so much negative feedback into your brain. You need to be positive. And so the Read, Lead, and Succeed book, a lot of executives now are starting their meetings with Dr. Seuss books, because Dr. Seuss is where it's at. I mean, a lot of us forget about this. If you reread your favorite children's book as an adult, you'll get a lot more out of it, because you're like, oh, they were talking about this. It's a lot deeper.
Right. It's like they slip in a little adult humor that you don't get when you're a kid. That when you become an adult, you find it hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, you read the Bible, and that's what Jesus did. Jesus talked in parables. He's like, okay, here we go. Here's this story. Can you figure out the story? And Peter's like, I don't get it. All right, here's another story. I mean, that's the way you teach it, because it sticks. I mean, that's what, for me, I always have remembered stories. I love stories. I mean, if somebody can give me a story, I'm like, oh, one of my favorite stories. The book I'm writing right now is about crazy people around the world that made a difference. And so there's this ultra marathon in Australia from Melbourne to Sydney. It's like 550 miles long. And the first run was in 1983. And so they got all the world's best, fittest ultra marathoners. I mean, this is supposed to take like a week. And so all of them go into the starting line. And then all of a sudden there's this 60-year-old farmer wearing overalls and galoshes and boots named Cliff Young. And all the other ultramarathoners are looking at him like, what? You're going to run with us? And so they start, and like he's in last place, and they all run, and then that night, all the other runners, they sleep on the side of the road. Well, nobody told Cliff you can sleep. And so he just runs through the night. And, the next day, he's running, but in the next night, everybody else goes to sleep, and he keeps running. Well, here's the story, Shawn. Not only did the 60-year-old farmer, Cliff Young, win this marathon, he won it by 10 hours over the guy that finished in second place, because the guy never stopped. And that's what I always tell people. I'm like, that's the one thing I can tell you. One of the best goals in life is never quit. Be persistent. Be persistent. It's one of the secrets to success. So again, I apologize. I have this horrible habit of giving long answers to short questions.
No, it's all good. I want to ask you about your program. I want to definitely get some more information about that, because I think that a lot of people, especially those with children, trying to get children to engage in reading. So I definitely want to tell me more about what it is. Read, Lead, and Succeed is.
Yeah. So again, people will get the book, but they'll also get a couple of preview trainings of the things that I do with parents. And so basically, it's a program for struggling and reluctant readers. We don't teach kids how to read. I mean, there are programs because there's kids that there's things there's reading disabilities out there, and
Right.
just every reading disability is curable. And if you ironically, over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs are dyslexic. And so there's all kinds of interesting research on that. But what
Oh,
we
interesting.
do is when I was a kid, if I had the choice between the remote control and the book, it's not a choice. I mean, the remote
Right.
control, I'm not reading the book.
Right.
And I saw that with my students. And this is when I was like, well, wait a sec, why don't you choose the book? How can I sell the book? And
Right.
so I over 25 years of working with 35,000 kids, I'm like, okay, this is what works. And so I create a whole bag of tricks. I call them my weapons of mass instruction. And so basically, I created a program, and there's two numbers that I want people to think about: 67 and 20. And so the program lasts 67 days. And so for 67 days, every day, I'm doing short videos, giving parents and teachers ideas of a new idea of a way to get their kid excited about reading, and then we try it out. People ask, why 67? Well, there's a lot of people that'll say it takes 21 days to change a habit. And to those people, I say, show me the research. It's a completely fabricated number. I actually know where the number comes from. It's from a great book written in 1960 called Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. And Dr. Maltz was a plastic surgeon. And in the preface of the book, he wrote that he had noticed it took most of his patients about 21 days to get used to their new face. Well, a lot of self-help gurus, personal development people I respect, started telling people, oh, 21 days to a better body, whatever. And that is so irresponsible, Shawn. And I'll tell you why. Let's say you go on a diet for 21 days. You follow it religiously. But then on day 22, you slip. Well, you blame yourself. Well, there was research done at the University of London in 2009. They found it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit, and the average was 66 days. Well, I don't like the number 66, so I threw in an extra day, so we gave it 67 days. And it depended on the habit. So like if you want to drink a glass of water before breakfast, it might take you 18 days to turn that into a habit. But if you want to quit smoking, that's going to take 254 days. It's not quick. But the average was 66 days. And I noticed that with kids. Actually, in my program, I find usually by my poster boy, I had this little boy, Michael. He was a third grader. He's the bottom of his class, and his mother had it with him. And so she gets him in the program. And literally, just over a month later, Michael's teacher calls his mother, and she's like, "Do you have him on Ritalin?" And the mother's like, "No." She's like, "Well, what medication is Michael on?" And she's like, "I don't have him on medication." She's like, "What are you doing? He's gone from the bottom of my class to the top of my class." Well, I'm like, "Oh, this is great." But here are the two things that made me love Michael. First of all, the program got him so hooked on reading, he started a book club for all of his buddies. And now all of his buddies are reading. So now this teacher looks like the best teacher in the district. She's winning all these awards. Like, wow, you got the best reading scores, which I think is hilarious. It's just the kids are all doing that. But what really touched my heart was Michael's mother doesn't speak a word of English. She only speaks Spanish. Shawn, the program is meant for an adult to watch the video and then do the tip. She couldn't do that, so Michael watched me, and I guess I still have my teacher in me because the kids get a kick out of me, and I'm like, gosh, I hope I didn't say anything wrong or whatever. But because of that, we actually translated the entire program into Spanish too. So it's in English and Spanish. And so the program takes about 67 days. And then the other number that's important is 20, because we're looking at trying to get the kid to read 20 minutes a day. And those minutes can be spread out throughout the day. And it counts if you're reading to the kid. And so that's what I'm always teaching. Here's a quick tip for parents right now. You really want to help out your kid. Here's one quick tip. Turn on the closed captioning on the television set.
Yeah.
So parents will say, well, wait a second. If the show's in English and the subtitles are in English, what good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point. But let me ask you this. Have you ever watched the show with subtitles and not looked at the subtitles? It's very difficult.
Right.
Your brain is triggered towards those words, and there's actual research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the kids that watch more TV, their reading scores always go down, except for one country. The country with the top reading scores in the world also watches the most TV in the world. It's Finland. And how can that be? Well, Shawn, Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so they import like Brady Bunch and Cosby Show and Gilligan's Island from America, and then they have to put subtitles on all of them. The kids are constantly reading. And so that's just a real quick bonus tip for all parents out there. It doesn't take much, but it does. What we're trying to do is to establish a habit. It's like doing push-ups, you're not going to see it tomorrow, but 3 months from now, you are going to see that there's an effect.
Yeah. That's so interesting. That's super interesting. So when parents want to connect, or I guess so, ReLead and Succeed is for adults, or you just figured it's for both now then.
Well, the ReLead and Succeed is the book. That's a book for I wrote that for adults. My program is called thereadinghabit.com.
The Reading Habit.
They'll get all of that when they go into. I don't like to inundate people with 20 different websites, but ReLead and Succeed will get them into. They'll start getting videos from me about, well, here you should do the Reading Habit, and it's the program that's been used. It's being used around the world, and right now it's just in English and Spanish. We're looking at also doing it in Arabic and Tamil and some other languages.
That's super cool. I gotta ask you, because always, because this conversation is super great, always limited time, but there's this question I always ask everyone, and I love to see the differences in everyone's answer. And sometimes I love to see if I could guess what their answer would be. Yours, I would have no idea. So,
you have me intrigued, Shawn.
Speaking of Jim Carrey, so I always ask people this question: if there was something about the world if there was one thing about the world that you could put your finger on and change, if you had a Morgan Freeman and Jim Carrey experience, and you became you could part the cup of soup. What would it be?
Well, that's a very deep question, Shawn. Because I say kindness usually, but kindness, there has to always be bad with good. I guess one of the things I always love to preach to people is don't follow the golden rule, follow the platinum rule. So the golden rule is to do unto others as they do unto you. The platinum rule is to do unto others as they want to be done unto. And the example I give is, just because I love football doesn't mean I can give a brand new football jersey to my wife for her birthday and she'll be happy. What I have to figure out is, what does she want? What will make her happy? I think that's probably what I would do, is get people starting to consider each other's points of view a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, you are definitely inspirational. I know that a lot of people will get a lot of this. I hope that I still have your website on the screen, so I hope that people will go to your website, download the book and get connected to you, because I think it's really important, really get people to I'm distracting myself with a falling microphone. All right. I think it's really important and really helpful. So I really appreciate you, Danny, for coming on today. And I thank you so very much.
Thanks for all that you do, Shawn. I wish I knew you 20 years ago. I'd get your CDs and maybe you could teach me some Christian hip hop.
And it was before all of the digital stuff. Man, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless you. When I was 20 years old, I started one of the first multi-artist gospel rap labels in the country. Who listens to that, they said. That has no future is what they told me. That's a dead end, they kept repeating. That's a career killer, they warned me. What they didn't understand is that a pioneer can see past what you think is possible and has the endurance to push it through. And my new media television platform is that pioneer's mind at work once again. I give the unheard a voice. I give the marginalized a stage. And I give the unfortunate a good hand. This is Christian media like you've never seen it before. Because this is Shawn Riff-Raff Studios.
I'm a Christian with $100 million vision. Can nobody box me and say that's a contradiction? Goal driven, God just blessed me with the ambition. Look up, winner is the rest of definition. Been through hell, but the fire couldn't crisp them. Shut down the mouths of anybody, you dismissed them. 20 years gospel rap broke all the traditions. Cause from a teenager I was on the same mission. So winner, he running God business. He got clothing, plus he got the boss with him. He got a squad with him, real no frauds with him.